Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Babbling Irons match review show with myself and Sloth today. Manchester United won, West Ham won. A cagey game at times, Sloth, a game where we did okay at spells, and then we kind of allowed Man United back into the game, concede a sloppy goal, but managed to salve a point with the fantastic subs that Nuno made in the 80th minute, bringing on Andy Irvine to whip in a set piece from a corner and give us a goal. But we're going to dissect everything, obviously go through the analysis of the goals and talk about who impressed us, some positives to take away from this. Obviously, going to Old Trafford, getting a point, given the situation we're in, is a valuable point, but it does put us still in the relegation zone because of the Leeds results. So the pressure's on, and the games are coming thick and fast now. We've got Brighton away on Sunday, so we can't really rest on our laurels with this point. We take it, but we've got to move on now to the Amex. And then we obviously have some tough games after that with Villa at home and Man City away before Christmas. So tough games, but we have to keep picking up points and we have to keep pushing forwards, because otherwise we're going to start to see a little bit of a gap between us and the rest of the pack down at the bottom of the Premier League. But if you do enjoy this review show, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for all of the content we are publishing for the rest of the year and into 2026. And yeah, Sloth, let's start with the lineups. What were your thoughts on how Nuno set up? Obviously, he brought in a couple of players. Obviously, Paqueta was suspended again, so Magassa come into the midfield, and he brought in Souček as well. What were your thoughts on the initial lineup from Nuno?
I think it was a bit of a surprise that Guilherme in particular was dropped. Not because he's been particularly good. He certainly hasn't, but I think it's just that we are majorly lacking pacey outlets, and I think it's one of those things where for some reason Nuno seems to think that Paqueta's worth a place alone on creativity or whatever it might be. But I think when you're talking about what this team desperately lacks at the moment, it is pace and an outlet for, even if it's just carrying us up the pitch. And as much as I love Souček, he certainly is not that. And I think it was a moment when a lot of West Ham fans would have thought they were in for a long night when we saw that lineup announced. And to a certain extent we were. It was it's not the most exciting lineup in the world. You know what you're going to do when you see that. You know how you're going to play. And I think, we almost did it to a T, but in my opinion, we were quite lucky to only be, 1-0 down at stages in that game. But obviously we'll get onto that.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I think the lineup was definitely not that inspiring. As you say, when you're looking at the attacking options within that lineup, there wasn't really much for us to do. And we mentioned about Mateus Fernandes and how much better he is centrally. And, he was almost playing out on the left-hand side a lot, but he did have roam kind of license to roam inside a bit. So it wasn't like he was shoehorned out really wide like a Somerville, but it's not ideal. It's not what you want to see. But as you mentioned, Paqueta doesn't walk back into this team now, which we'll get onto towards the end of this. But let's look at the stats of the game and how it panned out. So Man United obviously dominating possession, 65% to our 35%. Expected goals of 1.8 to our 0.79, 17 shots to our 11, 4 shots on target to our 3 big chances just for one for West Ham, and 2 big chances missed for United, 0 for West Ham. And you can see the momentum graph on the right-hand side with the peaks and troughs of West Ham in the blue and Man United in the red. But to be honest, it was quite as you mentioned, it was quite a balanced game. I thought we started the first 20 minutes pretty well. I thought Man United were quite passive and allowed us to move the ball around quite easily. We had a couple of half moments where we made a few nice passes, and there was one instance where we cut the ball back to Fernandes and it was a good block from Casemiro. Another one where Bowen picks up the ball, gets past a few players and just can't get his feet right to get the shot off. So there were a couple of half chances for West Ham. And then obviously Man United had a couple of chances themselves as well, through the likes of Bruno Fernandes and Xerxes. But it was quite a cagey game, and it was quite a slow game to watch. And it definitely suited us because we haven't been, in terms of the intensity of West Ham stuff, we haven't really seen that much intensity in these types of fixtures, especially with that lineup, because of how much we lacked pace, how much we lacked dynamic attackers going forwards. And we mentioned that over reliance on players like Jared Bowen to create something. It really looks like that, because when we were looking at our in possession shape in that first half, more often than not, it was interesting because we were playing the back four. Obviously, Magassa and Potts as the holding midfielders, and then you had Fernandez on the left. Bowen had free roam, to be honest, to play as close to Wilson as possible and very much closer in, almost playing in that number 10 across the line. So he was going to the left hand side, right hand side, wherever he was finding gaps. And it was actually Thomas Souček who was playing more on that right hand side. What did you make of that from Nuno? Because I think it just became really easy for Man United to negate anything coming down that side once they'd sussed out what we were doing with Souček. And he just doesn't offer the threat that he can do in different positions. And I thought it was a strange decision putting him out on the right hand side.
No, I completely agree, and I think we've kind of had discussions outside of the videos where I've said quite why we don't put Diouf at left wing at these points when we have Kyle Walker-Peters who can come in and play left back is confusing me, because if you want to play Souček, then you need someone who's going to deliver into him. And then when you look at your options, it's the quality of delivery, but also the pace just isn't there. You have Bowen and that's about it. But if you want someone to pick out your tallest player on the pitch, you're going to pick you 10 out of 10 times from this West Ham side. So I think it's a case of we need to sort of start looking at how we carry the ball up the pitch, but also where are the outlets, where are those sort of escape valves when we need to gain 30 or 40 meters of space, whatever it might be, up the pitch and just ease the pressure off ourselves. Because Souček can offer you knockdowns, he can offer you winning this kind of scrappy bits, but he's not offering that consistently outside of those aerial balls. And you rightly mentioned that United picked up on that very quickly, and as soon as they did, the game turned again. And those peaks and troughs kind of show that as well, where once United sussed us out, there was no plan B. And I think that's why it's quite disappointing for me that we're not seeing a plan B at the moment. We did for those final 10 minutes, but it's riding your luck with the plan A that isn't working and then suddenly deciding to switch to a plan B, which feels very, very risky at this level.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's both ways. Like obviously, Paqueta, Somerville being out, they are two big names. They're two big misses, particularly Somerville to that attack, because we just don't really have any other wide attacking outlets. But at the same time, he's still selecting Souček to play on that right hand side. And look, when we were out of possession, sorry, we were seeing stuff like this where Souček was almost tucking into that midfield, and then Bowen was being in that central zone, either marking Casemiro or Fernandez. He was often kind of man marking Casemiro. So Souček was tucking in. It wasn't like he was playing like a traditional right winger like Jared Bowen, but it did negate what we could do. But I kind of understood what Nuno was trying to do. He's trying to get Fernandez and Bowen close to Wilson so he's not as isolated, and he's trying to get his best players on the ball in the most dangerous positions possible, and then trying to use the likes of Diouf and Wan-Bissaka, who was excellent in that first half, Wan-Bissaka, to get forwards as well. Diouf as well, I think he struggled again. I think for me, he's just not up to the level to be playing consistently in the Premier League against these really good attacking wingers in 1v1 situations. I think we've seen what he can bring, the positives he can bring, but when we're playing a back four in particular, I do have my reservations about him defensively, and he's still young, still got a lot to learn. But I think there was a few times, especially in that first half, when Diallo was just going past him, and a couple of chances Man United created was from that, and obviously got booked in the first half because of it as well. But another player that came in, Sloth, was Magassa, and we're going to obviously talk about him towards the end when he got the equalizer for West Ham. But what did you make of his introduction, especially in the first kind of like 20, 25 minutes of the game? Because he hasn't played much football for West Ham. He's been chucked in again because of Paqueta's suspension. What did you make of it? Again, going to Old Trafford, it's a big environment to go and play your first game in a long time in.
I think first kind of 10 minutes or so, he looked a little bit off the pace. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. I think he just sort of looked a bit unsure or unconfident in the players around him. And I totally understand that, because I think him and Potts are really the only two central midfielders, like I'd say players you can use in that pivot who offer you the ability to play quick passes, quick, powerful passes into each other, and then turn and create space. You know, Guido can pass. We all know that. He's suited to a slower league, but he cannot give you that option in terms of turning and creating space. And that's something that this midfield has been crying out for. It was crying out for at the start of the season when we saw James Ward-Prowse attempting to play there. We saw it when Nuno came in and he was playing Andy Irving in that position and starting him in games. Like, they are not players, they're players who can do certain things, but they're not players you can rely on for the duration of a Premier League game to actually do anything competitive physically and, you know, in terms of their pace and intensity. And I think Magassa grew into the game as he got more confident with Potts and the players around him, that he could try those quick 1-2s. He could try a turn and not have to worry too much that the distance behind him was just going to get eaten up, because that's what we saw. You know, that's the kind of thing that we saw when we lost to Brentford, when we lost to Leeds, is that when the midfielders lost the ball, they were immediately exposing the defence. And Potts just kind of helps you cover that. But with Magassa's combination of physicality, which I think he started to really grow into the game after that first 10, yeah, it was onwards and upwards from there, and he just kind of never looked back from there. It was really, really positive stuff, and that pivot has to be the blueprint going forward. And even if it's just until January and maybe we look to get more bodies in, I think Magassa and Potts has to be the foundation of that midfield.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I think, as you mentioned, there was a little bit of ring rust in the first 10, 15 minutes, maybe over eager to get in and get involved in challenges, and he was getting caught out a couple of times. But as you said, he grew in confidence. The more he got on the ball, he made a couple of really good challenges, and he just started to grow in confidence. That's all it was. You know, a player that hasn't played much football. So, yeah, we went in at halftime 0-0. Obviously, Man United had a couple of chances. We had a couple of half chances, but there wasn't really much in it. And it was kind of interesting to see when Nuno was going to make a change, if he was going to make a change. But he held his cards. He stuck with the same 11 in the second half. And for me, it was just another passive start. I think the difference is we were almost playing for the point at 0-0, which is, it's frustrating because I think Man United aren't good enough to play like that for. I think we could have shown them a little bit less respect, because I don't think they're the level of, say, an Arsenal or a Man City away. It's a completely different complexity altogether. And I think we just got caught out. And I think it's been a recurring theme. I know Nuno's shored things up and he's trying to build from the back, and we know he's a defensive, pragmatic manager, but the defense still has to take responsibility of what's happening. And that's how the first goal comes from Manchester United. So let's go through it. So as we can see here, we're back in our shape, that 4-4-1-1 or 4-3-3, with Souček on this right-hand side and Bowen and Wilson kind of leading the line up top. So we're defending in a compact shape. So very, very compact, very close together, which we can see. And we're leaving both Dalot and Diallo, their wing backs, really high and wide, and just leaving them to it until the ball goes wide, which is absolutely fine. The ball comes through, though, and then this is where players start to switch off a little bit. So the first thing Man United do quite well is obviously Mbeumo tucks in because they're playing this back three, and it allows Diallo the space outside. And Dalot, who's got the ball at the moment, has just come into this midfield position here to pick up a nice space. The ball then comes out to Casemiro, and this is where we see the first movement. So we know Dalot scores the goal eventually, and he just makes that movement into the box, which Magassa doesn't see initially. But then you've got loads of time to then communicate that as a team, to pass players on, to get this organized. But we just don't seem to do it. There just seems to be a lack of communication, which we've spoken about before in match reviews, for that back line and between the midfield and back line. And we can see here, Juve versus Diallo, obviously a danger, a threat, because of what's happened in the first half. So Juve can't go diving in because he's on a yellow card and he has to be very careful. Man United take advantage of that. But we can just see in the middle of the frame there that both Cunha, Xerxes, and Dalot there just drifting into that middle position. Souček's on Fernandes and Wan-Bissaka's tucked in. So already we're starting to see that Man United have an extra player in that box that we need to deal with, and we need to communicate between us to pick up and organise. But we don't really do that. The first thing is when Diallo gets it inside, he plays the ball back to Casemiro. Xerxes made the run in behind, and that's attracted Mavropanos out to that. So Mavropanos goes with the runner of Xerxes, and then that leaves the space for Dalot and Cunha behind. And we can see that because Wan-Bissaka's dropped quite deep, he hasn't stayed with the runner, which look, Wan-Bissaka had a fantastic game, but he should be in tighter here. He should be tucking in, or Soucek should be tucking into that position as well, because he's not really impacting the game there. Or the third option is Magassa should be doing it because he's run off the back of him. Magassa should be back in that position, blocking off any passing lane that comes in. But then we just get stuck a moment. Both Magassa and Potts, they're sitting comfortable in front of that defense, but they're not aware of what's happened behind them. They haven't had that communication from either Mavropanos. We can see Tadebo's been dragged out to that left-hand side as well, from Soucek, from Wan-Bissaka. There just hasn't been that communication or organization from the back line. And that's where we talk about taking responsibility and being a leader on that pitch, which I just don't think we have enough of at the moment. And we need to continue to instill in this team. Otherwise, things like this will happen where Dalot's just roamed into the box. No one's communicated it, and he's just stayed stationary. And on the 6-yard box is completely isolated, completely free, because there hasn't been that communication. And a simple run from Xerxes has pulled Mavropanos away. Again, no communication between the midfield and back line. And then obviously the ball gets deflected. You could argue Fernandez, if I take it back a frame, could close this down better. I think it's weak from Fernandez, to be honest, when I watched it back. But again, it is unfortunate how it deflects. But again, could have done better there. The ball then comes into Dalot. He takes the touch, again, has time to touch, turn, and then shoot. Wan-Bissaka's too late. He tries to block it. And Dalot, to be fair, nice finish and sends Areola the wrong way. But does it just come down to it again, Sloth? Lack of leadership, lack of accountability, and lack of communication between the back line at times. And we're just allowing simple goals like that to happen.
I think so. I think, when we signed Tadebo, I kind of made a point that he needs someone next to him. You look at Nice, where he was really the kind of player that I think many people thought he would be, and looked like that sort of centre back who could just go to a top team and excel. That's because he had Dante next to him, and Dante was absolutely sensational in terms of marshalling him, telling him what to do, and it took the pressure off him. And look, Mavropanos can play 90% of a football game really well, and then he can play 10% like a headless chicken. He's not a leader, and he might do it for Greece. He might be able to do that with his fellow countrymen. It's a different scenario. But the thing is, when you don't have someone who is barking orders and giving you those commands to actually position yourself in a certain way, or even say like the little things like Magassa loses his man, and for me he is culpable here. Like, as good a game as he has, that a lot of this goal is on him, because he kind of just doesn't, he gives up the responsibility of following his man, and he never really assumes any responsibility for anything else. It's you lose your man and you just kind of go, oh, okay, well, what's happening now? And that's kind of the only big criticism I can have of him, or that in that performance last night. And unfortunately, these kind of players who will grab the sort of initiative, and I'm not saying grab your teammate like we were all bloody thinking Bowen would do, but I'm talking about someone who's actually going to bark an order and say, look, follow that man, do this, follow Dalot. That's what's needed. And I think people kind of talk about Jordan Henderson and the role that he's had at Brentford. He started the season poorly, and I would be surprised if anyone disagrees with me there. And if you do, go back and watch those early Brentford games of the season, because he was crap. And I'm sticking on my Jordan Henderson hate, because people will know I hate Jordan Henderson. But he's been fantastic ever since, because people have reacted to his leadership, and the fact that he is the one who's now saying, well, I'm gonna bark the orders, I'm gonna tell people to do these things. Those players are getting harder to find in today's game. A player who will do that and take responsibility is a rare thing these days. We don't have any in the squad, and I think the sooner we can find one, the difference will be absolutely night and day. It will be huge.
Yeah.
The problem is actually either finding one or making sure you have enough players who lead by example, like Jared Bowen does, to caveat that and sort of create an environment where people are comfortable calling each other out. And part of the reason that I really want us to sign someone like Charlie Cresswell is because he's quite comfortable barking orders. He can also speak French. So this goal doesn't happen if we have a player like Charlie Cresswell and someone who is comfortable, marshalling that back line, because Areola's not comfortable doing it. And
Yeah.
if he was, this goal doesn't happen. If Magassa was comfortable doing it, this goal doesn't happen. And I think this was my real kind of head in hands moment last night, where I just kind of went, oh, it could be a long night if we continue to make these silly errors.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, when the goal went in, it was so frustrating because it was coming. Like, we weren't really doing anything. We were kind of just sitting ducks at that point. And if the goal happens, it happens. And I didn't really see us creating much going forwards. We were very much reliant on Jared Bowen's carrying of the ball or industrial work against Man United's back three. But to be fair, we rode the next 10 to 15 minutes. I wouldn't say we were particularly good after. I don't think our reaction was amazing after going 1-0 down. I'm still surprised that Nuno didn't make any changes at that point, but he stuck with his guns. And yeah, obviously Man United made 4 subs before we made ours. And then Freddie Potts came off for Andy Irving and Thomas Suchek came off for Mohamedou Kante, which was nice to see him come onto the pitch as well, because he's been really impressing in the under-21 squad. Um, but that was in the 83rd minute, and that was when West Ham had a corner. So I think at that point I was kind of like, well, why are you bringing on Andy Irving over someone like George Murphy, who you can stick out onto the left-hand side, bring Fernandes centrally, and almost go for it a little bit more. But B, as well, it was just too late for me. The subs were too late. But I'll hold my hands up. The impact was instant from both of them. We obviously get the corner. Irving goes and takes it. To be honest, I thought our corners were really, really poor throughout the night, from both sides, from both Potts and Bowen. They were just not beating their first man. It was really frustrating. So in comes Andy Irving to save the day, Sloth. Here he is, pictured in all his glory, taking the corner. And to be fair to West Ham, it's a really nicely worked set piece routine, but really poorly defended from Man United's perspective. So we can see here the zonal mark from Man United, and we've seen the benefits and also the negatives of zonal marking, especially at West Ham this season and last season. But Kante, who's just come on, is distracting Mason Mount in this position, and Bowen's just behind him, and then he makes his move. So Bowen makes his move in front, and you can see there, because of how big and powerful Kante is, Mason Mount is obviously drawn to him, which allows Bowen to just drift into this central zone. And then the ball comes in from Irving. I can't really see it in this freeze frame, but the ball goes over Fernandes. Bowen gets the flick on at the front post. I'm thinking it's going in at this point. It's a really good clearance off the line from Man United. But there is Magassa to slot home after what was an excellent performance at Old Trafford, and deserved the goal, to be honest, for how he played. And yeah, you could see after that the celebrations and the emotion that came out of Magassa. It clearly meant a lot to him to get that goal after the performance he put in at Old Trafford. So yeah, it all starts with Andy Irving, Slough. How do you analyse that goal, and how happy were you to see it hit the back of the net?
Look, I was delighted that we equalised, and to be honest, I don't really think we deserved to. I think Man United pretty much nullified us. But Roy Keane made a really interesting comment afterwards in the analysis with Slaven Bilic, where he basically said it looked like they just assumed they were going to win. And I think that's pretty much the nail on the head. They kind of wrote us off as a threat, and you can't do that at this level. I don't care who you're playing, you cannot do that. And I think Andy Irving has shown probably why Nuno even tried to start him, because look, he is not a Premier League football player. You only had to watch another kind of couple of minutes further forward when he had a chance to play. I think it might have been Bowen through on goal, and the pass he plays is absolutely awful. He loops a pass into nowhere near Bowen, and it's so easily cut out, and it would have put him through. Like, it would have put him into a really good position. That said, this is an excellent corner. You rightly mentioned our corners were poor all night. They were really frustrating. And I think that at this point, we need to make sure that, we said earlier in the season, we need to stop conceding from corners. We need to now look at the fact that we have a large physical profile in this squad and utilize that so we start scoring from our own corners. And it's been a bugbear of mine for years. It's our throws are terrible, our set piece delivery is often terrible, and it's almost like we have a lack of a plan. This is a very clear cut plan. Jared Bowen moves forward, uses the distraction of someone like Kante to get into space and create a chance. We need to make sure we have these fundamentals. And one of the big things is having quality delivery into the box. This is a quality cross in that Jared Bowen gets an excellent head on. And as you rightly mentioned, it's probably the least guest player or least expected player to be there. But Magassa rolls out to him and he just slots home. It's a very tidy finish, but it's one that you expect a Premier League player to make. And
Yeah.
I think, we mentioned how he kind of started the game slowly. He deserved his goal because since that sort of 10th or 11th minute, he just massively drifted up. And I think it was kind of displayed in the goal that we concede, is that he's perhaps thinking, how can I progress the play forward, as opposed to what's my defensive responsibility here. This is where he's thinking, I'll find the space and I'll stay in this space to add offensively. And, we equalize, it wins us the point. And I think overall, this is the kind of basis of a goal that we need to start trying to build towards. We need a different set piece taker. It cannot be Andy Irving, because you cannot play Andy Irving in a Premier League game. You cannot start him in a Premier League game. So if you're limiting yourself to only 10 minutes worth of set piece quality, you're really going to suffer at this level. But yeah, I'm going to stop honing in on Irving and say that it's a case where I think Bowen deserves a lot of credit for the header and the movement for it. Kante deserves a bit of extra recognition as well, because, as you mentioned, he rightly distracts Mason Mount and he causes problems. That's one of the things that Souček does, and it's greatly displayed there again. Drawing players to you because you're either massive or because you are electric in terms of your pace. That's what players can do, and it will create that element of doubt and lead to goals. And yeah, I think you have to praise Nuno's substitutions, even with the caveat of maybe the starting 11 wasn't the best, but you have to tip your hat and say, yeah, fair enough, it gets us a point away.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Look, we take the point. We've obviously come back from behind again. I think that's maybe the 8th point we've now collected from Nuno from coming from behind in matches, which is, something we haven't seen West Ham do often. So there is that positive to that. And obviously going to Old Trafford, regardless of how good or bad Man United are, it's still a good point when you look back at the season. It's still a good point on the road, and it's something to build on. It's not, it could have easily been back-to-back defeats to Liverpool and Man United, and then the pressure's really on to try and get something from Brighton. But this might just give the players a little bit more confidence going into that match on Sunday away at Brighton. And hopefully we can just keep the momentum going, because it is so important that we don't just let this slip now. Obviously, Leeds beating Chelsea was an unexpected result, and it's put us in the relegation zone. So we have to respond to that. We have to keep pushing. We have to look at that Brighton game as a game we can go and get 3 points from. And there should be no reason as to why we shouldn't approach the game in that manner. So I think for me, as you mentioned, Magassa was clear man of the match. He was outstanding, especially after the first kind of 10, 15 minutes when he really settled into the game. Second half, really, really good. Best player on the pitch by a mile. And to his credit, he hasn't played much football, but he's lasted the duration of the game and kept going with the intensity that he did. I think that's credit to him. And obviously, he's still only young, 21, 22 years old, so he can do that. Same with Freddie Potts. I thought he had a decent game as well in that midfield. And I think, as we mentioned before, where does Paqueta even come back in that Brighton game? I know we'll obviously do the preview show, but for me, the midfield three should be Potts, Magassa, Fernandez if Somerville is fit on that left-hand side, because I think that's just our best blend of midfielders at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see what Nuno does there. I think Wan-Bissaka as well had one of his better games we've seen from him in a long time. I think he was lucky not to get sent off with that second challenge he made, but how many times he made last-ditch tackles last night to prevent a goal in a really dangerous area of the pitch, and also offered a threat going forward. So very good performance from him. And another one, Todibo. He's been getting a lot of praise on platforms like Twitter. So let's end with that, because he's been someone that's been so up and down in a West Ham shirt and just hasn't been able to stay fit, hasn't been consistent, has made mistakes, hasn't looked up to the speed. I thought last night, and to be honest, in the last few games, he's really developed and really started to show the value of what he can bring. So what were your thoughts on Todibo's performance?
Yeah, well, I think there were times when he just looked a level above the rest of the defence, and the only player who came close to him was Wan-Bissaka, and I think they're probably level pegging. I think after last night, they were both excellent, and Todibo, he did that thing which great centre backs do, where they make the game look easy, and even if it's just a little turn to create space inside, you kind of sell the attacker that you're going to just carry the ball one way, you turn, you create space, and it opens up a whole avenue, like to retain possession. He did that, I think, at least 2 or 3 times in that second half, and it just created the chance for us to get forward and relieve the pressure. And he looked fantastic. It was one of those where, if he carries on like that, not only do we not need a left-sided centre-back, but we will probably be struggling to keep a hold of him. If he plays for the rest of the season like that, we'll struggle to keep a hold of him. But get someone next to him who will bark orders, and I think we'll see Todibo go to another level as well. I really do think it's as simple as that, because once he gets his confidence, once he gets settled, you see the Todibo that you saw last night, and you see the player that was showing so much potential at Nice, showed the potential for the move to Barcelona. And I think if Nuno can get him playing, then we'll be in a much better place.
Yeah, I think Nunes definitely had a positive impact on Todibo. You see him at the end of the game as well by the away fans. Them two had a big embrace, a big cuddle between them. So clearly a player Nuno likes, and clearly a player Todibo is responding to. So yeah, we take the point. Obviously, go into the Brighton game now. We've got a couple of days to rest and recover, and hopefully go into that and get 3 points. But respect the point. It could have obviously easily been a defeat. So good to come away from Old Trafford with something. And we take that momentum now into the Brighton game. So if you enjoyed the review, make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel for more content, and sloth. Until the next one.
Come on, you irons.